My name is Kathleen Morgan. I am 68 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I worked as a seamstress, stitching wedding gowns and uniforms for other families while raising my only son with my own two hands. Every dollar I earned, every night I stayed up at the sewing machine, I poured into one dream, a small white beach house in Santa Barbara. It was never a luxury to me. It was my proof that sacrifice can turn into something solid, something lasting. That morning, I drove the familiar coastal road, expecting peace. The sea air smelled of salt and eucalyptus, and my heart lightened with each mile. I parked, lifted my old leather bag, and walked up the stone steps. My fingers shook as they wrapped around the key. This house was mine. This was supposed to be the place where I rested. But when the door opened, it was not peace that greeted me. Melissa, my daughter-in-law, stood in the doorway. She was wearing my favorite embroidered apron, the one I had stitched years ago as a gift to myself. Her eyes carried a cold contempt I will never forget. Behind her, I saw strangers, her mother, her cousins, children I did not know, running through my garden, throwing wet towels over my wicker chairs, and shouting as if this was their property. Melissa's voice cut the air like a blade. "What is this old parasite doing here? We don't have space for you." In that instant, I felt my heart seize. My house, my garden, my life's work, reduced to nothing more than a stage for their ridicule. I should have screamed. I should have demanded they leave. Instead, I stood very still. My lips curved into a smile, not the smile of kindness, not even the smile of forgiveness. It was the silent smile of a woman who had carried burdens her whole life and was finally ready to set them down in a different way. I stepped back onto the porch. The wind from the ocean cooled my skin, steadied my breath. I whispered inside myself, words no one else could hear. I just smiled. But what I did next turned her life into a nightmare. When I stepped back from that doorway, when the word parasite echoed inside me, my mind carried me far away from the noise of strangers in my home. It carried me back to the hum of an old Singer sewing machine, to the faint smell of starch and cotton, to nights when my eyes burned red but I refused to stop. I was not always 68. I was once a young woman of 32. Standing in a silent kitchen with a baby in my arms and a folded death certificate on the table. Daniel was not even a year old when I lost his father. From that moment, it was me against the weight of the world. I did what I knew best. I sewed. Wedding gowns for brides who glowed with hope, prom dresses for young girls clutching magazines and dreams, uniforms for nurses, waiters, and factory workers who came through my small shop. Each garment left my hands not just as fabric, but as a fragment of survival. Every time I stitched lace, I whispered to myself that my son would have milk. Every time I hemmed a skirt, I thought of rent that would be paid. I became both mother and father, both caretaker and provider, without time to grieve for the man I had lost. In those years, silence was my companion. I learned not to cry in front of Daniel. I would wait until he was asleep, then press my face into a small purple handkerchief my own mother had embroidered decades before. It was a simple square of cotton, decorated with violet blossoms. To anyone else, it was nothing. To me, it was the last piece of comfort she left me before she passed. I carried that handkerchief everywhere, folded neatly in my pocket, stained with the quiet tears I never allowed anyone else to see. It became my anchor, my reminder that women in my family had endured storms before me. Daniel grew, tall and curious, never knowing the hunger I kept at bay or the bills I paid at the last possible moment. I remember watching him sleep in the small crib I bought secondhand. I would count the coins in a tin box under my bed and whisper promises. One day we would not rent. One day we would not answer to landlords who raised prices every season. One day we would have a place of our own. That dream took shape slowly, painfully. I opened a small bank account, depositing whatever I could after rent, food, and supplies. Sometimes it was $10, sometimes only $3, but I kept going. I saved the way I sewed, stitch by stitch, coin by coin. My hands grew rough. My back bent, but the numbers in the bank grew too. By the time Daniel was a teenager, I had managed to buy a tiny lot by the coast. People laughed when I told them. A seamstress buying land in Santa Barbara? They smiled politely the way people do when they think you are foolish but too earnest to mock outright. I ignored them. I carried the deed in my purse like a sacred text. That lot was nothing more than weeds, sand, and a glimpse of the ocean through leaning fences. But to me, it was the future. Brick by brick, year by year, I turned it into a house, not with my own hands, though I did more than a fair share of painting and sanding, but with every dollar I had scraped together. Each time a bride left my shop smiling in her gown, I pictured a wall being raised. Each time I finished sewing uniforms for a hospital ward, I imagined another tile placed in the kitchen. When the house was finally complete, painted white with blue shutters, Daniel was already grown. He walked beside me into the empty rooms, and I remember telling him, "This is where our family will always have a place." I meant those words. I believed them with all my heart. For 20 years, that house became my refuge. I cared for it with the tenderness of someone who had lost too much already. I planted roses in the garden, red and white, so their scent would welcome me every time I returned. I kept wicker chairs on the porch to watch the waves roll in. I cooked Thanksgiving meals in the kitchen, even if some years Daniel was too busy to join. Every detail carried my fingerprints. Every corner a memory of sacrifice turned into stone and wood. That is why Melissa's words cut me deeper than she could ever imagine. To her, I was an intruder in a place she had claimed through marriage and convenience. To me, this house was not just a building. It was my life made visible. It was the sum of every sacrifice, every night at the sewing machine, every tear absorbed into that purple handkerchief. I thought of that handkerchief in my pocket as she sneered at me. I thought of my mother's steady hands guiding the thread, teaching me to embroider violets on fabric when I was a girl. She told me once, "Kathleen, flowers on cloth will fade, but strength stitched into your hands will not." I had lived by those words. I had believed that if I kept giving, if I kept building, the world would honor it. But standing on that porch, listening to strangers laugh in my home, I realized something my mother never told me. Strength is not only in giving, it is also in knowing when to stop giving. It is in drawing a line that no one is allowed to cross, even if they share your blood. As I walked away that morning, I pressed the handkerchief against my palm. Its fabric was worn thin, but it still held, just like me. When I returned the next morning, determined to retrieve a few of my belongings, I pushed open the gate that led into the garden. The sight before me felt like a physical blow. My roses, the ones I had tended for years with careful pruning and gentle watering, were crushed under careless footsteps. Red petals and broken stems scattered across the grass like discarded confetti. Loud music blasted from a speaker propped against the wall, drowning out the sound of the waves that once soothed me. The air reeked of cigarette smoke and spilled beer. Children I did not recognize ran wild across the lawn, kicking a ball into my clay pots, shattering one with a dull crack that made me flinch. The wicker chairs I had bought with the last of my savings sat drenched in damp towels and stained T-shirts. Candy wrappers and soda cans littered the path I had swept only a week earlier. It was no longer my sanctuary. It was chaos. I stepped carefully over the broken stem of a rose, my heart pounding, and then I saw her. Donna, Melissa's mother, lounged on the terrace as if she were queen of the place. She wore a wide hat and large sunglasses, sipping from a glass she had no right to fill from my kitchen. At her side stood Kyle, a tall, broad-shouldered cousin I had never met, laughing loudly at something on his phone. The two of them looked at me as though I were the stranger. Donna leaned forward, studying me with a smirk. Her voice carried, sharp and cutting. "So this is the famous matriarch? I thought she would be more impressive. She looks ordinary." Laughter rippled from those around her. I stood rooted, holding my bag tightly, against my chest, as though it were armor. For a moment, shame rushed through me, hot and suffocating. Ordinary. The word hung in the air, heavy with cruelty. Melissa appeared then, walking out of my kitchen with a plate of food balanced on her hand, still wearing my embroidered apron. She looked from her mother to me, her lips curling into that familiar, disdainful smile. She stepped closer, her words smooth and deliberate, meant for everyone to hear. What's yours is Daniel's, and what's his is mine. That's how real families work. Her voice carried like a verdict, and the group around her nodded, some chuckling, others glancing at me as if I were the unreasonable one. I felt my pulse quicken, my hands trembling. The sentence hung in the air, a declaration that erased me, my sacrifices, my decades of labor, in a single breath. I wanted to protest, to shout that this was my property, my life's work, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I let the silence grow heavy. I studied each face. The indifference of Kyle scrolling through his phone, the way Donna's lips curved in satisfaction, the way Melissa lifted her chin in triumph. They believed I was powerless. They believed my silence meant defeat. Inside, something shifted. Their laughter, their cruelty, their sense of entitlement. It sparked not despair, but a cold clarity. I was reminded of every wedding dress I had sewn, every uniform I had pressed, every dollar I had saved while others doubted me. These people thought they had the right to take what was mine simply because I was old, simply because I lived alone, simply because I had once given everything to my son. Melissa turned to direct the children, her voice sharp, ordering them to clear the hallway so she could bring more food outside. I watched one boy kick a ball against my garden gate, leaving a dent. No one stopped him. No one even noticed. I inhaled deeply, the scent of crushed roses mixing with the sour stench of beer. I pressed my palm against the pocket of my dress where the purple handkerchief rested, the one my mother had embroidered. It was still there, folded neatly, a reminder that strength was not in noise but in persistence. As I stood on that ruined lawn, surrounded by people who had no respect for me or for the life I had built, I realized this was not just an invasion, it was erased. They wanted me invisible, erased from the very walls I had raised. I said nothing. I turned slowly, my footsteps steady despite the chaos swirling behind me. Their laughter followed me, but it no longer pierced me the way it had minutes before. I knew now that silence would be my weapon. They believed they had won. They had no idea what storm my quiet resolve was already summoning. I stood there, the smell of beer and smoke hanging thick in the air, the laughter of strangers ricocheting off the walls of the house I had built. For a long moment, I could not trust my own voice. My throat felt dry, my heart heavy. Donna's smirk lingered in my vision, Melissa's words about what was mine being theirs, still echoing. I wanted to speak. I wanted to remind them of every hour I had worked, every sacrifice that had brought this house into existence. But I knew those words would mean nothing to people who had already decided I was disposable. So I lifted my chin just enough to meet Melissa's cold stare. My voice was steady, though quieter than I expected. I understand. The words surprised even me. They did not surrender. They were a line I drew within myself. I could see how Melissa interpreted them, though. Her smile widened, her shoulders straightened, and the people around her chuckled as if victory had been declared. To them, my words meant weakness. To me, they meant patience. I turned, each step deliberate, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes as I walked back toward the gate. Behind me, Donna laughed, a cruel, satisfied sound, and Melissa's voice rang out again, sharp and triumphant. They believed they had forced me into silence. They believed I would fade quietly into the background. The children shouted as their ball slammed against the garden wall. Kyle barked orders into his phone, ignoring me completely. Their noise rose like a tide, drowning out the quiet strength I was carrying with me. But I did not stop. Halfway down the path, I reached into the pocket of my dress and felt the familiar fold of fabric. My fingers wrapped around the purple handkerchief, soft from years of use, thin in places but still intact. I gripped it tightly until my knuckles ached. That handkerchief had soaked up the tears I never let my son see. It had survived decades of wear, just as I had. It was proof that fragility could endure, that silence could be stronger than shouting. I paused at the gate and allowed myself one last glance over my shoulder. Melissa stood on the terrace, arms crossed, the embroidered apron tied snugly around her waist, as if she owned not only the fabric but the years it represented. Donna leaned back in her chair, sipping from her glass, a satisfied queen surveying her conquest. The sight might have broken me once, but now it hardened something inside me. The laughter behind me grew louder, deliberately mocking, as though they wanted my back to bend, my shoulders to slump. Instead, I straightened. I walked through the gate, pulling it closed with a soft click that only I seemed to hear. The sound was almost ceremonial, like the closing of a chapter. As I walked to my car, the handkerchief still clenched in my palm, I thought of my mother. I remembered her words about strength stitched into my hands. She never told me that strength sometimes means saying nothing. She never told me that silence could be a blade sharper than any insult. When I slid into the driver's seat, the noise from the house was muffled by the car's frame. For the first time since stepping onto that lawn, I could breathe. My eyes burned. But no. Tears came. Instead, I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, the fabric of the handkerchief pressed between my skin and the leather. The engine started with a low hum, steady and reliable. I drove away slowly, the road curving along the coastline. The ocean shimmered on my right, indifferent to the human drama unfolding on its shore. I envied that indifference for a moment. Then I realized I did not need it. What I needed was resolve. Behind me, my house was filled with noise, with people who believed they had won. Ahead of me stretched miles of open road and the quiet hum of possibility. I was not defeated. I was waiting. They thought they had silenced me. They thought they had reduced me to nothing more than an old woman, too fragile to fight back. But they did not understand the strength of patience, the power of dignity, the kind of storm that builds slowly, without sound, until it breaks everything in its path. I pressed the handkerchief to my lips for a moment, closing my eyes. "I understand," I whispered again, but this time the words meant something different. They were no longer addressed to Melissa or Donna. They were for me. I understood who I was. I understood what they had taken, and I understood what I would do next. The laughter from the house still echoed faintly in my ears as I drove further away, but it no longer mattered. They believed my silence was a weakness. They had no idea it was the beginning of their undoing. The motel was the kind you never planned to stay in, the kind that smelled faintly of bleach and damp carpet no matter how hard the owners scrubbed. A faded neon sign buzzed outside the window, flickering on and off, advertising rooms for $120 a night. I had never spent money so reluctantly. For years, I prided myself on living carefully, never wasting a single dollar, saving with the discipline of someone who knew hunger. And now, here I was, handing over my hard-earned cash to sleep in a place that smelled of mildew, while strangers lounged in the house I built with my own hands. The room was small, walls painted an anonymous beige, the kind of color meant to erase personality. A thin bedspread, patterned with flowers long since faded, covered a mattress that sagged in the middle. A single chair sat by the sliding glass door that led to a narrow balcony. I placed my leather bag on the dresser and sat down in the chair, staring out toward the coastline. In the distance, far across the dark stretch of highway and rooftops, I could see the glow of lights from my own house. I wrapped the purple handkerchief around my fingers, twisting it slowly. My mother's embroidery of violets caught what little light there was, a reminder of her steady hands and her unspoken strength. I whispered to myself, all those years of saving, all those years of sacrifice, and tonight I am treated like a guest with no place to go. The thought struck hard. How many nights had I stayed up, sewing gowns while Daniel slept? How many times had I counted coins into a tin box, whispering promises that one day he would have stability? That house was not just 4 walls by the ocean. It was proof that a woman could hold her family together even when the world tried to break her. And now, my own daughter-in-law had erased me from it with a single word: Parasite. The word clung to me like smoke. I pressed the handkerchief against my lips, closing my eyes. Parasite. They thought I fed on them, when it had been me feeding them all along. Without my work, without my endless giving, there would have been no roof, no education, no opportunities. My son's college tuition had come from long nights bent over fabric. His first car, his down payment on a starter home. All of it had roots in the calluses on my hands. And still, they dared to call me useless. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the distant hum of traffic, the laughter of strangers walking past the motel. I felt the loneliness pressing in, but I refused to collapse under it. Tears threatened, but I held them back. I had learned long ago that crying solved nothing. What mattered was endurance, the quiet decision to keep moving. On the balcony, the night air was cool and heavy with salt. I looked toward the faint glow of my home, imagining the noise spilling from its windows, the music, the voices, the careless destruction of everything I cherished. I whispered into the darkness, years of sacrifice, and I am cast aside like an unwanted guest. The words did not break me. They carved something sharper inside. I thought of Daniel. Where was he that night? Did he know what his wife had said to me? Did he care? Questions burned, but I pushed them aside. This was no longer about his choices. This was about mine. I could either accept the role they had written for me, silent, erased, disposable, or I could write my own. I sat there until the motel's neon sign clicked off for the night, leaving the parking lot in shadow. Inside, I laid on the sagging mattress, the handkerchief clutched against my chest. The loneliness was real, the humiliation undeniable. But beneath it all, a different fire smoldered. I was not broken. I was waiting. In that moment, I understood something I had never dared to admit. My silence was not weakness. It was preparation. Melissa and her family believed they had won. They believed the old woman had been pushed aside. But what they did not understand was that storms do not begin with thunder. They begin with stillness, with a gathering of clouds, with air so heavy it feels like nothing will change, until it does. I closed my eyes, listening to the motel pipes groan, and whispered a promise only to myself. They will not erase me. Not from my house, not from my life. The morning after that long and restless night, I rose before the sun. The motel room was still cloaked in darkness, the air heavy with the smell of damp carpet, but I was already dressed. I had no appetite for the packaged breakfast waiting downstairs. What I needed was clarity, not food. I folded the purple handkerchief carefully and slipped it into my pocket. It had always been with me in the hardest moments, and I knew this was one of them. I drove into town with my hands tight on the steering wheel, the coastline passing by in streaks of pale gold as the sun began to climb. I did not head toward my house, not yet. I headed to the one place where my sacrifices had always found safe harbor, the bank. The branch sat on the corner of Main Street, a modest brick building I had walked into every month for the last 15 years. I stepped inside, greeted by the cool air and the faint scent of polished wood. There, behind his desk, sat Mr. Davis, the branch manager. He had known me since my 40s when I first opened an account with the savings from my sewing business. His hair had turned silver since then, but his eyes remained sharp. "Mrs. Morgan," he said warmly, rising to shake my hand. "It's been a while since you've come in person. How are you?" I forced a small smile. "I've had better weeks, Mr. Davis. I need your help." He gestured toward his office, closing the door behind us. The hum of the lobby faded, leaving only the quiet tick of a clock on the wall. I placed my leather bag on the desk and sat across from him. For a moment, I hesitated. Speaking the truth out loud made it real, and I knew once I did, there would be no turning back. "My family," I began, steadying my voice, "is trying to take what is mine. My home, my savings, even my dignity. They want to claim I am no longer capable of managing my own affairs." His brow furrowed, and he leaned forward. "Is this about Daniel?" The name caught in my chest, but I nodded. "Yes, him and his wife. They have already falsified papers. They want to declare me incompetent." He sat back, his jaw tightening. Then he shook his head slowly. "Kathleen, I have worked with you for over 15 years. I've seen the way you manage every deposit, every withdrawal, every cent accounted for. You are sharper than most of the young clients who wander in here with their phones glued to their hands. You are more than capable. You are one of the most disciplined clients I know." The words steadied me. For the first time in days, I felt the ground beneath me. I was not imagining things. I was not fragile. I was not losing my mind. I pulled the handkerchief from my pocket, smoothing it against my lap. "I need proof," I said softly. "Not just your word, but something official. A document stating that I am fully competent to manage my finances. I also need my accounts protected. No one, not even my son, should have access without my consent." Mr. Davis nodded without hesitation. "We can lock down all accounts immediately. No third-party access, no transfers, nothing without your personal authorization. And I can. Draft a letter today, signed and notarized, confirming your financial capacity. It will carry the weight of this institution." I exhaled, tension easing from my shoulders. "Thank you." As he typed on his computer, the rhythmic clacking of the keys felt almost like the hum of my old sewing machine. Familiar, steady, reliable. I realized that this moment was my first step back into control, the first twist of power returning to my hands. Melissa thought I was powerless, a parasite. But here, across from a man who had watched my savings grow year by year, I was recognized for what I truly was: capable, disciplined, and strong. When he finished, he turned the monitor so I could see. "Here are your balances," he said gently. The numbers glowed on the screen. Decades of sacrifice. Every gown I had stitched, every uniform I had hemmed, every night I had gone without, summed into 6 neat figures. $122,000. I felt a small, unexpected smile touch my lips. They thought I was dependent, surviving only on a widow's pension. They had no idea. They never asked, never cared to see the quiet strength I carried in bank slips and deposits. "Mrs. Morgan," Mr. Davis said firmly, "you are not at their mercy. You have resources, and you have allies. I will make sure nothing is touched without your say, and that letter will be ready by this afternoon." I closed my eyes briefly, gripping the handkerchief once more. "You have no idea how much that means to me." He shook his head. "I think I do." When I left the bank, the air felt lighter. The ocean breeze carried across the street, lifting the edges of my hair. For the first time in days, I walked with purpose. I was no longer the woman mocked on her own porch. I was the woman who had spent a lifetime preparing for storms like this. As I slid into my car, I placed the folded letter from Mr. Davis in my bag, beside the handkerchief. One was memory. The other was proof. Together, they reminded me of who I had always been, a survivor who did not shout, but who endured, and who fought with quiet precision. Melissa had made a mistake. She believed I had nothing left to defend myself. She believed my silence meant surrender. What she did not know was that silence is not the end of a story. Sometimes it is the beginning. I left the bank that afternoon with Mr. Davis's letter tucked safely in my bag. The words printed on that page were more than ink. They were a shield, a reminder that my mind was intact, my decisions valid, and my life still mine to shape. Yet I knew a letter alone would not stop Melissa or Donna or even Daniel. They had already crossed the line of decency. They would not hesitate to cross the line of law. I needed more than proof of competence. I needed someone who could fight in a language they could not twist. So I made a call I had been dreading. Her name was Helen Parker. She was a lawyer with decades of experience in family and property law. More than that, she had been a close friend of my late husband. I had not spoken to her in years. Sometimes grief makes us turn away from reminders of what we have lost. But as I dialed her number, I knew she might be the only person who could help me now. Her voice came through the line, steady and warm, yet edged with the precision of someone used to listening for details that others missed. "Kathleen Morgan? My goodness, it's been too long. How are you?" I hesitated, then answered truthfully, "Not well, Helen. I need your counsel. It's urgent." There was a pause, then her tone shifted to the professional seriousness I remembered from long ago. "Come by my office this afternoon, 4 o'clock, we'll talk." Her office sat in a sandstone building downtown, lined with ivy that curled against the windows. Inside, the walls were filled with law books, their spines worn from decades of use. I sat across from her at a polished wooden desk. She had aged, as we both had, but her presence was as commanding as ever. A streak of silver cut through her dark hair, and her eyes, sharp behind her glasses, studied me carefully. "Tell me everything," she said. "Do not hold back." So I did. I told her about arriving at my house, about Melissa in my apron, about Donna's cruel laughter, about the children running wild in my garden. I told her about the papers I had found, falsified documents, medical lies, the plan to declare me incompetent. I did not spare her the pain of Daniel's betrayal. My voice cracked once, but Helen never looked away. She simply took notes, occasionally asking a pointed question that showed she was already shaping the case in her mind. When I finished, silence settled over the room. Helen leaned back, steepling her fingers beneath her chin. Then she spoke, her voice calm but resolute. "They underestimated you, Kathleen. They assumed you were too old, too tired, too alone to fight back. That was their mistake." I swallowed hard. "Can we stop them? Can we truly make this right?" Her eyes met mine, unwavering. "We will not only take back your house, we will show them the consequences of underestimating a mother, of treating her as if her life's work were theirs to plunder. This is not simply about property. It is about dignity, and I intend to make sure they feel the weight of that." The words struck deep. For days I had felt stripped bare, humiliated, erased. Now, for the first time, I felt the stirrings of something different. Not vengeance, not bitterness, but justice. Quiet, measured, undeniable justice. Helen leaned forward. "I want you to understand, Kathleen, this will not be easy. There will be hearings, filings, and perhaps ugly confrontations. Your relationship with Daniel may never recover." I looked down at the purple handkerchief in my lap, smoothing its edges. My voice was soft but firm. If he was willing to erase me for money, perhaps there was no relationship left to save. She nodded slowly, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "Good. That clarity will carry you, and I will carry the law. Together, we will make sure they cannot twist the truth any longer." At that moment, I realized why I had come to her. Helen was not simply a lawyer. She was a mirror held up to me, reflecting back the strength I had almost forgotten. Where Melissa saw weakness, Helen saw discipline. Where Donna saw ordinariness, Helen saw resilience. She reminded me that my silence was not surrender, it was strategy. She pushed a folder across the desk toward me. "We will begin with immediate actions, an injunction to freeze any transfer of your property, a motion to invalidate the false medical report, and, most importantly, an eviction order. They will not stay in that house one day longer under the protection of the law." I touched the folder with trembling fingers. "You make it sound so possible." "It is possible," Helen said firmly, "because you have evidence, you have witnesses, and most of all, you have the truth. Do not underestimate the power of that." As I left her office, the sun was setting over the city, casting golden light across the pavement. For the first time since this nightmare began, I did not feel like a victim walking away from loss. I felt like a woman walking toward her own justice. Melissa had her laughter, Donna had her mockery, but I had something stronger: the law, the truth, and allies who respected me. I clutched the handkerchief in my hand as I walked to my car. Its fabric was worn, its threads frayed, yet it held together, just as I did. Helen's words echoed in my mind. "We will not only take back your house, we will show them the consequences." And I believed her. The day after meeting Helen, I returned to my house. I did not walk through the front door or announce my presence. I moved quietly, like a stranger trespassing in her own life. My excuse, if anyone asked, was simple. I had forgotten personal belongings, but the truth was sharper. I needed to see with my own eyes what I already feared. The gate creaked softly as I slipped into the yard. The roses were even more trampled than before, stems bent and leaves yellowing from neglect. Music drifted faintly from inside, and I caught the scent of unfamiliar cooking, grease and spices that had no place in my carefully kept kitchen. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to move forward. Once inside, I walked slowly, careful not to draw attention. The living room was cluttered with suitcases and blankets, the floor scattered with toys and shoes. My once quiet retreat looked like a boarding house. Each step I took echoed with memory. The nights I had read alone by the fireplace, the mornings I had opened the curtains to let the ocean light spill in. All of it had been drowned beneath the noise of others who had no right to be there. I told myself I came only for clothes, for documents, needed, but my feet carried me upstairs to the master bedroom, my sanctuary. I opened the door and stopped cold. Donna stood at my dresser, humming softly as she folded clothes that were not hers. My dresses, my blouses, even my scarves were piled into bags as if they were donations for strangers. Rage rose in my chest, but I swallowed it. "Excuse me," I said quietly. She looked up, startled for only a moment, then smiled faintly. "Don't worry, we're organizing for you. Everything will be neat." Neat. As if shoving my life into plastic bags was a kindness. I nodded stiffly, pretending to accept her words, then waited until she left the room with one of the bags. My hands shook as I walked quickly to the wardrobe, pulling open the heavy doors. Behind it was the hidden compartment I had built years ago, a secret place where I kept documents too valuable to leave in the open. My fingers brushed the panel, my breath shallow. The door slid open. Chaos greeted me. My papers, once neatly stacked, were scattered across the floor. Insurance documents, property deeds, even my will, all pulled apart, some crumpled, some stained. My heart raced. I knelt, gathering them in trembling hands, and that was when I saw it, a file that did not belong to me. Inside was a set of documents bearing Daniel's name and Melissa's. My eyes scanned quickly, words blurring until they landed on the heading, Transfer of Property Ownership. My beach house, the home I had built from decades of sacrifice. They were trying to move it into Daniel's name. My stomach turned, but it was not over. Attached to the file was a medical report, my name, my date of birth, and beneath it, a declaration. Patient exhibits signs of advanced cognitive decline, unable to manage personal or financial affairs. The signature belonged to a doctor I had never seen from a clinic I had never visited. I pressed the handkerchief to my lips to keep from crying out. They were trying to erase me, not only from my house, but from my own mind. To the world, I would appear incapable, a burden, a shell of a woman. And then I saw it, the detail that pierced deeper than any insult Melissa had thrown. A handwritten note at the bottom of one of the pages. I knew the handwriting. I had watched it grow from a boy's scrawl to a man's steady script. It was Daniel's. With this money, we can get a bigger place. My son's words, not Melissa's, not Donna's. Hi. I sank to the floor, the documents clutched in my hands, the purple handkerchief falling across my lap. Memories flashed. Daniel as a child on the beach, laughing as he built sandcastles, his small hand gripping mine. Daniel as a young man, beaming the day he graduated. A diploma I had helped pay for with endless nights at the sewing machine. All of it was there, colliding with the reality that now stared back at me in black ink. He had not just allowed this plan, he had signed his name to it. For a long moment, I could not breathe. Betrayal does not always arrive with shouting or violence. Sometimes it comes quietly, in handwriting you recognize, on paper that smells of ink and deceit. I gathered every page, sliding them into my bag with careful hands. My tears did not fall, not yet. Instead, a silence filled me so heavy it seemed to echo in my ears. This was not just Melissa's cruelty or Donna's arrogance. This was my son's choice. As I zipped the bag closed, I whispered words meant only for myself. So, this is the truth no one says aloud. My own blood believes I'm disposable. The revelation cut deep, but it also clarified something within me. Love had blinded me. Loyalty had silenced me, but the papers in my bag were undeniable. I would no longer excuse Daniel's weakness as confusion or Melissa's cruelty as immaturity. This was deliberate. This was theft, dressed as family duty. I left the room quietly, slipping down the stairs before anyone noticed. My heart pounded, but my footsteps were steady, the documents pressed against my side like a weapon I had never wanted, but now carried with grim resolve. When I stepped outside, the wind off the ocean hit my face, cool and sharp. I clutched the handkerchief tightly once more, the violet embroidery rough against my skin. For years, it had absorbed my grief in silence. Now it absorbed my fury. Behind me, the house glowed with lights, filled with voices that mocked and dismissed me. But in my bag, I carried their undoing. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of clarity only justice can bring. I dressed carefully, slipping into a gray suit that had hung in my closet for years, saved for occasions that demanded dignity. I tied my hair back, pressed the purple handkerchief flat, and placed it in my hand like a quiet banner. It was not just cloth. It was memory, strength, and proof that even silence can carry power. Helen met me outside the house at 8 o'clock sharp. She wore a navy jacket, her posture straight, her expression unreadable but fierce. Beside her stood 2 uniformed police officers and a notary public, their presence like a wall of certainty. The sight steadied me. I was not walking into this battle alone. As we moved toward the gate, the sound of laughter and clinking dishes floated from the terrace. The smell of frying bacon and coffee drifted through the open windows. For a moment, it almost felt like a family breakfast until I remembered whose voices filled the air. Strangers, invaders, people who had declared me a parasite in my own home. I stepped onto the gravel path, my heels clicking with deliberate rhythm. My heart thudded in my chest, but my face remained calm. When Melissa appeared on the terrace holding a steaming mug of coffee, her smile froze. The cup slipped from her hand and shattered against the tiles, dark liquid spilling across the stone like a stain she could never scrub away. Helen's voice carried across the yard, strong and formal. I am attorney Helen Parker, representing Mrs. Kathleen Morgan, the legal and sole owner of this property. We are here today with an immediate eviction order, signed by the court. Melissa's eyes darted wildly between Helen, the officers, and me. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Behind her, Donna rushed forward, her hat askew, her face flushed with anger. "You can't do this!" Donna shouted, her voice cracking. "We have children here!" One of the officers stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "Ma'am, children are not an excuse for unlawful occupation. You and your family have 2 hours to collect your belongings and vacate the premises. Any property belonging to Mrs. Morgan must remain here." Donna's mouth opened and closed, searching for a retort, but none came. Her eyes blazed with fury as she turned back toward the kitchen, shouting for everyone to pack. I stood still, gripping the handkerchief tightly. The embroidery pressed against my palm, grounding me. This was the house I had built stitch by stitch, dollar by dollar. And now, at last, it was returned to me. Melissa stumbled down the steps, her voice rising shrill. "This isn't fair. Daniel is her son. What's his is mine. That's how families work." Helen didn't flinch. "What's hers is hers, and the law recognizes that." The officers began listing the violations: trespassing, property damage, theft. Each word felt like a nail sealing the coffin of their arrogance. I watched the faces of the cousins and friends who had once laughed at me. Now their expressions shifted from confusion to fear, their belongings being stuffed hastily into bags. The children whimpered, clutching toys as their parents barked frantic orders. Donna tried again, her voice breaking. "You can't just throw us out like animals." The officer replied, "You made that choice when you entered a home that was not yours. The law is clear." Melissa turned to me then, her eyes blazing. "You could stop this. You could tell them to leave us alone." I held her gaze, my silence cutting sharper than any answer. For once, she seemed to realize that my quiet was not a weakness, but a decision. She looked away first. As chaos unfolded around us, suitcases dragged across the porch, voices raised in panic. I remained still. I pressed the handkerchief to my lips, not to hide tears, but to remind myself of the generations of strength stitched into its fabric, my mother's violets, my years of sacrifice, my refusal to be erased. 2 hours later, the yard was littered with bags, boxes, and angry words left hanging in the air. Donna slumped against the car, her hat pulled low. Kyle cursed under his breath as he stuffed clothes into the trunk. Melissa stood rigid, her arms crossed, her eyes filled with venom she no longer had the power to unleash. When the last suitcase was loaded, the officer turned to Helen and nodded. "The property is secure. Mrs. Morgan is once, again, the rightful occupant." Helen placed the keys in my hand. Her voice softened, just enough for me to hear. "It's yours, Kathleen. It never stopped being yours." I looked at the house, at its white walls glowing in the morning light. For days it had been filled with voices that tried to erase me. Now it stood waiting, silent, as if holding its breath for me to return. I walked slowly up the steps and onto the terrace. My heels clicked against the tiles where Melissa's coffee had spilled, the stain already drying. I stood there, breathing in the salt air, clutching the purple handkerchief against my chest. Justice had arrived, not with shouting or fists, but with papers, patience, and the quiet strength they had mistaken for weakness. It was nearly noon when I saw Daniel's car speeding up the driveway. Dust rose from the tires as he braked hard, jumped out and slammed the door behind him. His face was pale, his eyes wide, as though he had already heard what had happened. The house stood silent now, cleared of the chaos that had filled it only hours before. The police were gone. Helen had returned to her office, and for the first time in days, I was alone with the walls I had built, until Daniel appeared. He walked toward me, his steps unsteady, his hands opening and closing as if he didn't know what to do with them. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, "I can explain." I sat in one of the wicker chairs on the terrace, the purple handkerchief resting in my lap. My suit still felt crisp, my posture straight. I looked at him calmly, though inside my heart ached. "Then explain," I said. He dropped his gaze, rubbing the back of his neck. "I did it for my family. You don't understand the pressure, the bills, the kids' school, the mortgage." Melissa said. I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. "And what am I, Daniel? Am I not your family?" His head snapped up, his mouth opening, but no words came. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw the boy who used to flicker in his eyes. That boy was frightened, ashamed. But layered over him was the man he had become, defensive, proud, and weak in all the wrong ways. "You are my family," he whispered. "Of course you are. But Melissa, the children, they are my responsibility now. I had to think of them." I leaned forward, gripping the handkerchief tightly. "Your responsibility does not erase your loyalty to me. It does not give you the right to betray me. Daniel, I built this house brick by brick, dollar by dollar. I sewed until my hands bled so you would never know hunger. And this is how you repay me? By conspiring to declare me unfit? By calling me a parasite?" He flinched, shaking his head. "That wasn't me. That was Melissa." I stared at him, my voice low but steady. "But it was your handwriting on the note. With this money, we can get a bigger place. Those were your words, Daniel, not hers." Silence hung between us, heavy as stone. His lips trembled before he finally muttered, "I was desperate. I thought, maybe it wouldn't matter. You're comfortable in Chicago. You don't even use this place that much." My chest tightened, not from anger, but from sorrow. "It matters because it is mine, because it is the life I built after your father died, because it is proof that I was strong enough to raise you alone. Did you think that didn't count? That my sacrifices were nothing?" He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "It's always the same with you, always reminding me of the sacrifices, always making me feel like I owe you everything." I stood slowly, the handkerchief still clenched in my fist. "You do owe me, Daniel. Not money, not houses, respect, honesty, the loyalty a son should have for his mother. That is what you owe me, and that is what you failed to give." His voice cracked then, desperation breaking through his pride. I didn't know what else to do. I'm drowning, Mom. The bills, the expectations. Melissa pushes. The kids need more, and I can't keep up. I thought if I had the house, if I could sell it, we'd finally breathe. For a moment, my heart wavered. I saw not just the man who betrayed me, but the boy who once clung to my hand on the beach, the boy who trusted me to keep him safe. I saw his exhaustion, his weakness, his hunger for approval. He was both guilty and pitiable, both cruel and broken. Tears burned my eyes, but I held them back. My voice was softer now, though no less firm. You could have come to me, Daniel. You could have asked for help. I would have listened. I might have found a way. But you chose lies. You chose betrayal. You chose to erase me for your own comfort. He sank into a chair across from me, his shoulders slumping, his head in his hands. I know, he whispered. I know I was wrong. I just didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to admit I failed. I looked at him for a long time, the ocean wind tugging at my hair, the sound of waves crashing in the distance. Failure is not shameful, Daniel. Betrayal is. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes red. For the first time, there was no excuse left in him, only the hollow weight of truth. I turned away, walking toward the railing of the terrace. The house stood behind me, mine again, and the sea stretched endless before me. My voice carried over my shoulder, calm and final. I cannot give you back what you lost when you chose to betray me. But I can tell you this. From now on, you will stand on your own. That is the family you chose. And this house, this life, is the one I chose. We both must live with those choices. The handkerchief fluttered in my hand as the wind caught it, violet threads glinting in the sun. I held it tighter, feeling my mother's strength stitched into the fabric, reminding me that even in heartbreak, dignity must remain. Daniel sat in silence, his body heavy with shame. And for the first time, I did not feel powerless before him. I felt free. The courtyard of my house had turned into a storm of confusion. Suitcases lay open on the gravel, clothes spilling out, as if even the fabric itself wanted to escape. Children cried, their small voices piercing through the chaos. Melissa barked orders while Donna wrung her hands, her face red and swollen with anger. The sound was a far cry from the laughter and triumph they had shown days earlier. One of the younger children, no more than 7, walked hesitantly toward me. His cheeks were streaked with tears, his toy car clutched tightly in one hand. He tugged at the sleeve of my gray suit and looked up at me with wide, confused eyes. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice trembling, "why are you kicking us out? We didn't do anything wrong." The words pierced me deeper than Melissa's insults ever had. For a moment, I felt the sting of guilt, though I knew it was misplaced. I knelt slowly, my knees pressing into the gravel, and placed my hand gently on his shoulder. "You are right, sweetheart," I said softly. "You did nothing wrong. This isn't about you. This is about the choices the grown-ups made. This house is mine, and they came here without asking me. I'm not punishing you. I'm only asking that my home be returned." His lips trembled as he nodded, too young to fully understand, yet old enough to sense the weight of my words. Melissa saw us and flew into a rage. She stormed across the yard, her voice shrill and cutting. "Don't talk to my children. You have no right to confuse them." I rose slowly, brushing the dust from my suit, my expression calm. "I'm not confusing them," I replied quietly. "You did that when you told them this house was theirs." Her face flushed red and she shouted, her words sharp with venom. "You're already old. What do you need with such a big house anyway? Look at you, gray hair, weak hands. You should be grateful we even take care of you." Before I could respond, Helen's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on Melissa, her tone even but powerful. "Every insult about my client's age, every comment meant to diminish her worth, is being documented as evidence of elder abuse. I suggest you choose your words carefully from now on." Melissa froze, her mouth open mid-retort. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. Not the fear of me, but of consequences she could not control. Donna rushed to Melissa's side, muttering angrily, but the damage was done. The officers standing nearby had heard every word. They scribbled notes into their pads, their presence a reminder that the law was not on Melissa's side. I stood straighter, the purple handkerchief still clenched in my hand, its fabric warm against my skin. Days ago, they had called me a parasite. They had laughed at my age, mocked my simplicity, dismissed me as fragile. But now, the tide had turned. My silence, my patience, had brought me to this moment. The law standing beside me, the truth in my hands, and their arrogance unraveling before everyone's eyes. Melissa's voice broke, softer now, almost pleading. "You don't understand. We needed this house. We needed the money. You live alone. What good does it do you?" I shook my head slowly, my gaze steady. It does me the good of knowing I built it, of knowing it is mine, and that, Melissa, is reason enough. The children huddled close to their parents, tears drying into silence. The suitcases were shoved into car trunks with clumsy haste. Donna muttered curses under her breath, Kyle avoided my eyes, and Melissa stood rigid, arms folded tightly across her chest. But I no longer saw them as victors. I saw them for what they were. Trespassers, liars, people who mistook kindness for weakness and age for irrelevance. And now, stripped of entitlement, they were being sent away not by my hands, but by the laws. Helen turned to me, her expression softening. "This is what dignity looks like, Kathleen. Not shouting, not revenge. Just the truth, upheld." I nodded, pressing the handkerchief to my lips for a brief moment. The violets stitched by my mother seemed to whisper back, reminding me that endurance carries its own power. When Melissa finally climbed into her car, she shot me one last glare, her voice rising in desperation. "This isn't over, you bitter old woman. We'll fight this." I did not flinch. I simply lifted my chin and replied, "Then I'll let the law meet you again." The engine started, the cars pulled away, and silence returned to the yard. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of restoration. For the first time in weeks, the air around my house belonged to me again. I stood on the porch, the handkerchief fluttering gently in the ocean breeze, and realized that the power had shifted completely. I was no longer the old parasite they mocked. I was the rightful owner, the mother who had refused to bow, the woman whose quiet strength had become unshakable proof that dignity outlasts cruelty. The days that followed moved slowly, each one carrying the weight of both justice and sorrow. Melissa and her family were gone from my house, their laughter and chaos replaced by the sound of waves and the creak of wooden floors settling in silence. But their departure did not erase the scars they left behind. Broken dishes, ruined cushions, trampled roses, those were wounds that could be repaired. What cut deeper was knowing they had tried to erase me, not just from my home, but from my very identity. The legal system did not take long to respond. With Helen's guidance, the eviction order was followed by formal charges. Fraud, attempted property theft, falsification of medical records. Each word in the indictment was like a stone added to the pile of evidence. Melissa's arrogance had blinded her, and Donna's cruel tongue had betrayed them. Now the law would hold them accountable. When the papers were served, Melissa raged, shouting in the courthouse hallway until officers guided her out. Donna wept dramatically, blaming everyone but herself. Kyle slunk away, muttering excuses, and Daniel, my Daniel, stood apart, his head bowed, shoulders slumped as if the very weight of his choices had finally settled on him. He avoided my eyes, but I could feel his shame pressing between us like an iron wall. Helen turned to me outside the courtroom, her voice calm. They will likely face heavy fines, community service, and criminal records that will follow them for years. Justice is not quick, but it is certain. I nodded, though inside my chest felt heavy. Justice, yes, but no verdict could mend a broken bond between mother and son. That evening, I returned to the beach house. The rooms were quiet, emptied of strangers, yet I could still sense the echo of their presence. I walked slowly through each space, noting what had been damaged, what could be restored. My eyes fell on the mantelpiece in the living room, bare since the day Donna had packed away my belongings as though they were trash. From my bag, I took the purple handkerchief. Its fabric was worn, the violet embroidery faded from years of use, but to me it was brighter than any flag. I smoothed it gently and placed it on the mantel, spreading it flat so the flowers faced outward. It was not decoration, it was a declaration, a silent flag of victory. Not shouted, not paraded, but hung in dignity. As I stood back, I felt the weight of memory, my mother's stitches in that cloth, my own hands guiding Daniel through childhood, the nights of sewing, the years of saving, the endless sacrifices that had built these walls. The handkerchief tied it all together, a reminder that though they tried to erase me, I remained. The door opened softly behind me. I turned to see Daniel standing there. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed red. He looked smaller than I remembered, like the boy I once comforted after nightmares. But he was no boy now. He was a man who had chosen betrayal. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know what to say." I studied him for a long moment, the silence between us stretching. My hands rested on the mantel, fingers brushing the edge of the handkerchief. I wanted to step forward, to place my arms around him, to remind myself that he was still my son. But I stayed still. "There is nothing left to say, Daniel," I replied quietly. "You made your choices." His shoulders collapsed, his head dropping lower. I could see the shame carved into his posture, the regret heavy in his chest. But I did not move to comfort him. Some wounds do not heal with an embrace. Some lessons can only be learned in the emptiness created by one's own decisions. He waited, as if hoping for me to change my mind, to soften, to reach for him. When I didn't, he turned slowly and walked out, the door closing gently behind him. The sound echoed through the house, final and unyielding. I stood there alone, the ocean breeze drifting through the windows, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. My eyes rested once more on the purple handkerchief. It hung there not as a reminder of loss, but as proof of survival. I had been called a parasite. I had been mocked, dismissed, and nearly erased. But now the house was mine again. The law had spoken, and the dignity I thought they had stolen had returned stronger than before. I whispered into the quiet room, words only for myself. "This is my home, my life, my victory." The violets on the handkerchief seemed to shimmer in the fading light, as if my mother's hands reached through time to steady me once more. And I knew then, with absolute certainty, that no betrayal, not even from blood, could take away the strength I had carried all my life. Weeks slipped into months, and slowly my house began to breathe again. I hired a cleaning service to erase the final stains of intrusion. Broken locks were replaced with new ones, cameras installed at every entry point. Order returned, not just to the rooms, but to my spirit. The garden, once crushed under careless feet, became my quiet project. I replanted the roses, kneeling in the soil with gloves and patience. Each new stem was a promise, each bloom a defiance. They had trampled what I loved, but they could not stop it from flowering again. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the mail arrived with a letter from Daniel. The handwriting was familiar, steady, careful, and tinged with shame. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Mom," it began, "I hope you are well. Melissa and I are separated now. The children ask about you often. I know I don't deserve it, but I ask for your forgiveness. Perhaps one day we can be a family again." I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time, the purple handkerchief folded neatly beside me. Forgiveness. The word weighed heavily. I did not answer. Some wounds cannot be stitched with words alone. But at Christmas, I sent gifts to the children, books, puzzles, small treasures to remind them they still had a grandmother who thought of them. I wrote no note, only signed, "With love, Grandma." They were not to blame for the sins of their parents. Life moved forward, quiet but steady. The house, once filled with chaos, now wrapped me in peace. The waves rolled endlessly, the horizon stretched wide, and for the first time in years, I felt that my silence was not emptiness, but strength. I often thought of Melissa's words, sharp as knives, old parasites, and each time I whispered back to myself, they called me a parasite. But I was the foundation they stood on, and when they tried to erase me, I stood taller, in silence. On the final evening of that year, I brewed tea in the kitchen I had once feared lost. I carried the steaming cup to the porch, settling into my chair. The sea shimmered gold under the fading sun, the air salted with healing. I lifted the cup, letting its warmth seep into my palms, and breathed deeply. No shouting, no vengeance, just the stillness of dignity reclaimed. I sat there until the sky turned violet, the same color as the handkerchief folded on the table beside me, and in that moment, I felt whole again.